Welcome to the Narrowgate Podcast. I'm Weston.
And I'm Logan.
And this is the Zac Pruitt episode. Zac Pruitt is a graduate from 2018, and it was a really cool conversation that kind of walked through his whole journey from before Narrowgate to during Narrowgate to what God has done in his life currently as a pastor at his dad's church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
If you'd like to hear more about the Narrowgate Foundation, check out our show notes. Enjoy the episode!
All right, Zac Pruitt on video chat. I don't want to start that way. I'm going to start a different way.
It's too late. You got it started.
Yeah, no, that's what you call a failed open, not even a soft open, just a failure. Anyways, Zac, welcome to the podcast. We have decided to start every episode by asking two questions that I think that you'll be familiar with. Those questions are, who are you? And why are you here? You can answer those questions as practically or as existentially as you'd like, but they are yours to answer. So who are you and why are you here?
Man, there is a bunch of ways I would like to answer that, but I think I would say for this that I am a man who is deeply loved by God, and that reality informs my purpose as a man, as a husband, as a soon-to-be father, as a minister of the gospel, and as the reality that shapes my life. And I am here because I am a Narrowgate graduate and a huge fan of all things Narrowgate. I am assuming that's why I'm here.
What a solid answer.
I'm not going to say favorite answer, but it's up there.
Yeah,
man.
I mean, come on. I enjoyed every
charts,
syllable of that answer, you know?
That's good, man. That's great.
I'm thankful that you're here and that you're such a fan of Narrowgate. And I'm also a big fan of all things Narrowgate. I think I said in the first episode, like, I bleed Narrowgate.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like that's, and I think that it's cool to, to see graduates who are just as on fire about Jesus and, recognize the effect that, or the role that Narrowgate played in that, journey. And so I'm glad you're here.
Man, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say, like, you're clearly not here in the room with us. So just tell us for a minute, where are you at? Where in the world are you at? What you doing, man?
Man, I'm at recording this at my house in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I grew up here, lived here most of my life, moved away for a few years, and then after Narrowgate, moved back. And so I live here with my wife.
Yeah. I don't know much about you. And so I'd love to kind of start as close to the beginning as we can. What was life like for you before you knew about Narrowgate? Again, I don't want to make assumptions about when you first encountered the Lord, but man, I'd love to hear a little about your early life if possible.
So my dad's a pastor. He's been a pastor 30 something years. So I grew up with my dad pastoring churches and had a positive experience with that. I've thought a lot of this along my journey. I always had just this desire for adventure, and maybe recklessness might be the right word. If my friends were thinking about doing something crazy, I was always the one taking charge and leading that off. So I grew up in the church with a positive experience there, and towards the end of high school, got that adventurous spirit and a little bit of recklessness started to get me into some trouble. I don't think later in my journey, I don't think so much of my experience was rebelling against my dad being a pastor, rebelling against Christianity, as much as it was I felt I was missing out on some more fun that could be had elsewhere. And so that was sort of the draw for me to end up some places that were challenging and a little more dangerous. And so that ran its course. And without going into all the details of that, I ended up I did all of that as well while living, I guess, essentially a double life. I was, the pastor's kid at church every Sunday, involved in the youth group, but had a separate set of friends and a separate, way of life I was leading all at the same time. And so at one point the gig was kind of up. I was found out. All of that I had kept hidden was exposed. And so I was dealing with the consequences of that when a great family friend of mine who had no idea what was going on, he was living in Tupelo, Mississippi, and was working at a car dealership there that his family owned. And so he asked if I would come up there, and knew I liked working on cars, asked if I would come move up there and live with them and work at the dealership. So for me, it was like this, big second chance opportunity. Like I said, the gig was up where I was. It felt like a time for a fresh start. So I moved up there, and man, they really gave me every opportunity to build a new life and to be successful. But what I'd found to be true, and I've seen to be true over and over, is that you find what you're looking for. And so I was continuing to seek out the same things just because the location had changed. My mindset, my desires, all of that was still the same. And so within a month or two there, was running with a crowd, doing the same things, that I was doing with my friends back in Baton Rouge. But again, was used to this sort of double life situation. And so I had carried that on. And so at work, I was successful. I was getting promoted. I was, exceeding my own expectations and what I could accomplish there. But also, really broken and just seeking affection and, attention from my peers and seeking this adventure, everywhere I could. But at this point, it kind of reached a boiling point because I had way more resources than I'd ever had before because I was doing well at work. And so therefore that affected the recklessness. And so
you could afford more drugs and, use more.
Yeah, exactly. Man, again, there was this moment where the gig was up. I was busted again. And the people I was living with, they had 4 kids under 5 years old at the time. And man, I would come in at 2 a.m. and the little alarm would chime, and I would hear the kids wake up and crying, and the parents have to get up. And man, I'd just, run upstairs, go to my room, shut myself in there, and was just really taking advantage of their kindness in every way. They had kind of given me the world, and I was just, didn't care how my actions affected anybody. And when they kind of picked up on what was happening, after the kids had gone to bed one night, they asked me to come into the living room, and the 3 of us sat there, and they were crying with me about wanting me to find purpose and hope, and knowing that the way that I was currently living and experiencing life wasn't all that God had intended for me. And man, that moment, the fact that these people who, man, I had done them wrong in every way after they had given me everything, were still willing to sit with me in the mess and help me find a way forward. Man, that is a moment I have thought back on many, many times. Their kindness in that lowest point really shaped the trajectory moving forward. But during that conversation, my friends were telling me that my friend's wife's cousin had graduated Narrowgate many years ago, and so they were familiar with the program, and they said, look, we want you to check this thing out, see if it's of any interest to you. And I was, of course, initially closed off to it, and they said, look, we just want you to be, the best you. We want you to be better. This isn't, we know you're not happy and fulfilled where you're at. So they said, we're going to send you a 4-minute video and just watch this before you go to bed, and we'll talk more in the morning. And so this will kind of rewind a little bit, but the last month leading up to kind of all of it being exposed, I was miserable and would lay in bed every night crying out to God, just saying, man, the way that I'm living is painful and it's hopeless and it's killing me. And I need a new location. That was sort of my continued prayer. I need these external circumstances to change, and then things can move forward. And in that, this was literally a nightly event. And somehow one of those nights I stumbled across a Christian music video. And before the song started, the guy was saying, I've learned that sometimes the best prayer isn't God change these things around me, but instead God change me so I can handle the things that you're walking me through. And so everything in me grabbed a hold of that. And so that became my prayer. And within a couple weeks, this moment happens. I go up to my room and watch this video, and I hear young guys my age talking about finding hope and finding purpose and finding life and finding meaning and value. And man, I was in. I watched the 4-minute video and I knew that's where I needed to be.
Wow.
That's awesome.
I obviously, I have known you for a while. I mean, I think you were my second or third class in foundation, like when I started working here. And so like I've heard you tell that story, and I've known kind of you and your path, but just to watch you mature into the man that God has always meant for you to be and articulate it in that way is really inspiring. And it just makes me, I don't know, proud, Don't go turning red or anything, but it's okay if you do, because it's a podcast. And so not everybody's going to see it.
Colin can edit the color.
Yeah, you can do a color correction on your face.
Yeah.
Well, dude, so you you were obviously, you could see that God was moving you towards Narrowgate, and he was at work in your life during that time leading up to Narrowgate. And obviously, since Narrowgate, since you graduated, you have continued in that pursuit of him, and that your faith has just gotten stronger, and no more like double life and hiding and emptiness. Like, you are a pastor now, right? And you're influencing change in the lives of countless others. Looking back, like, what do you think, if you could maybe try to pinpoint something at Narrowgate? Like, what do you have a pivot point? Do you have something that you learned or encountered that you think was sort of thrusted you into that new life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was thinking about that recently. In foundation, Christian Harrison was the foundation lead at that point, and just seeing guys like you, guys like Christian, guys on staff at the time, I'm like, man, those look like and kind of sound like and seem like people that I know, but there's something else there. And it was just attractive. I'm like, man, if I could, have that sense of purpose and drive, and just wholeness, it would be life changing. But, and that's sort of the concept I came into Narrowgate with, was like, I just need a little help here and there, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I'll be good. I'll be able to move forward. And on one of the hikes we had in foundation, Christian made the statement that God doesn't want to clean up some old version of you. He wants you to be crucified with him and become an entirely new creation.
Wow.
And that was certainly, one of those light bulb moments where I'm like, okay, this whole thing isn't about fixing up some behaviors. It's not behavior modification. It's heart transformation and becoming a new creation and walking in that. And that is what I would say was maybe the first pivot point for me.
Wow. Well, that's good. I'm gonna have to go pat Christian on the back. He said a good thing.
Man, I can remember similar impactful, like, simple messages that sank so deep sitting in that living room in the lodge. Another one for me was, even the simplicity of God does not simply want to be a small part of my story. My story is a part of his story. Like, and I don't even just the slight paradigm shift of thinking about my life in that way. It's like, dude, he's the author and perfecter, not only of my faith, but like of reality, of our existence and eternity. And like, dude, how cool is it that he is calling us? He's inviting us to be a part of something so much greater than us ourselves. But like, man, a part of his kingdom, a part of his story. And I don't know, I love that. I think on that often. And I love these little like nuggets that seem so simple. And yet like we learn them, we internalize them here at Narrowgate, and we never forget them. We never truly forget them, you know?
I remember coming into Narrowgate. I mean, I've got a similar story as you do. And I think that's part of the reason why we were able to relate so well. But I remember coming into Narrowgate with the knowledge, the obvious knowledge that my way wasn't working, right? That my life under my reign was, a disaster. But I sort of had the same thoughts as you. Like, I just need to fix some things, right? And like figure out a couple of things why I do certain things. And once I get that, then I'll be good. I'll be good to go. But I remember knowing when I came in that I need a lifestyle change, right? And so I was, I think it was like my second or third day. There was the dad of another Narrowgate graduate who was on property just volunteering, helping out. And we were driving around in the white Chevy, property truck. And he was just kind of telling me about his son and his son's story and how he went through Narrowgate several years earlier. And so I remember asking him, and I was like really cool, that first week. Like I was like, like kind of quiet and reserved and like, and so I didn't say much. But at the end, whenever he was talking about, his son going through, I just kind of looked at him and I was like, well, did it work? Like, did Narrowgate work? Did it fix him? And he just looked at me, and it was almost like this moment where he was like thinking about a whole lot, right? He went back in time like years and years and years, and he just looked at me and was like, "Oh yeah." And that was it. That was all he said. But it was like, I knew that there was so much behind that he just couldn't express in like a, did it work? He was just like, "Oh yeah." It worked. And so now to be able to like have that experience for myself, like when somebody asks me like, well, did Narrowgate like make an impact on your life? My response is, oh yeah. It impacted all of it. What was something about your experience that you enjoyed? Like, what's one of your favorite, moments?
Oh man,
I have one.
So many memories. What do you got?
You asked that one with one in the chamber. Yeah.
I remember coming out of the lodge and seeing you kind of running frantically down the driveway. And, back then that's when I was property manager. So like, I was, making sure all the stuff on property was happening and signing work crews and stuff. And I knew that Zac was on the landscaping crew, and he was one of the students that I had just, given the privilege of riding one of the zero turn mowers. And so I see him running down the driveway that I just literally watched him drive down the driveway on the mower. And now he's on foot. And so I thought, oh boy, so he's running down the driveway, and I get in my truck and I drive down to the end of the driveway, and there's Zac like just kind of frantically looking around. And then I look over and there's the mower in the creek. That's one of my favorite moments because you were clearly like trying to take care of it before I came out there,
Yeah. Man, that was early on. And like, similar to you, I was, kind of playing it cool. And I'm that way generally, just kind of, reserved and like to observe and understand dynamics, and then I'll kind of jump in. And so I was kind of playing that, wasn't trying to ruffle any feathers, fly under the radar, and then boom, drop this, expensive lawnmower right into the creek. Like, well, there was an intern there. I'm like, man, we got to pull this thing out right now. Hurry up, help me. And then that's the day I learned something about Weston as well, because Weston's promise to me as we're pulling it out is, man, I'll keep this between us. And of course, by the time I finish mowing and get back to the lodge, everybody is aware of the fact that the mower was in the creek.
So that was not me. Okay. Somebody, I guess, witnessed and started sharing. And then when they asked me about it, I didn't lie. You know, I wasn't gonna violate my integrity there.
Oh man.
And then now here we're talking about it on podcast.
Right.
Yeah.
One of my favorite moments was sort of ironically was the Appalachian Trail hike. I was aware that before I even went to Narragansett, and leading up to it, the months leading up to it, I was just dreading that thing and was not excited about it at all. And then it came, and we had a really chaotic trip with a couple trips back and forth, but that was just a really exciting moment where I realized I was capable of doing more than I thought I was, and learning to ask for help and to lean on the people around me. It was a really, really enjoyable experience after I dreaded it for months. So that was really cool.
I'm just remembering, were you the class that went out and it rained really bad and you had to come back and then we sent you back out to finish it?
Man, it rained on us all day, and we get to a campsite finally, and everything's soaked. And I had a hammock. I didn't bring a tent. I brought a hammock. And so I hang this thing up, and Clifton DeVries, a buddy of mine, uses the same trees. So we kind of stacked them up, and I'm literally swinging in the trees because the wind is blowing so hard. He is too. And then finally I just hear snap, and his strap broke. He's on the ground. So yeah, it was pouring rain, strong winds. It got exciting up there for a while.
Oh gosh, I remember that, man. They came back and they were just miserable.
Yeah,
and I remember Clifton kept like looking at me. He's like, "Are you going to send us back out? You're gonna send us back out, aren't you?" And then so like the next day we're like, "Y'all just get some rest, wake up." And then the next morning I was like, "All right, so yeah, you guys are going back out."
Man, I'll keep this brief, but there's a great story. I've used it in sermons along the way, but when we went back out, the first day of that second leg of the trip, we come across, we're probably a mile into the hike, and it's me and 2 or 3 other guys. We're kind of in a little group, and we come across this lady who was late 70s, real small, skinny lady sitting off to the side of the trail. She's got her pack sitting there, and just looked kind of out of it. She was obviously dehydrated and struggling. So we get her some water and are talking to her. We get her a Cliff Bar and ask her where she's going. And she's going to a campsite that's like a mile down the trail. And so we were like, "Look, we'll take turns carrying your pack, and you can just walk, hold this water and kind of refuel on the way there. We'll get you there, get you set up." And so we're looking at her pack while we're talking through this, and on the strap, she's got a button that's Matthew 11:28-30. And so we're asking her about that. And she's like, "Yeah, I don't really know what the verse is, but I walked this same trail every day in preparation to come here to hike this. And somebody had left it out, on the trail for me. And so she said, I figured it was fitting to put it on here." And so we took turns carrying her pack. We would each, take a little while and pass it off. We get her to the campsite, get her set up. She's good to go. We got a picture with her. But the visual of what that verse is that played out for us of Jesus' "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." I'm like, man, this is the visual representation of what God invites us to, of, hey, you are carrying the weight of these burdens that I have asked you to give them to me. Man, let me carry this and walk with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And so, man, that's probably why I say that's one of my favorite memories. That was worth the whole trip.
Dude, that's what an amazing story.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious, man. I mean, obviously, you talked about being a teenager and having that sense, that hunger for adventure. And obviously, where where that road can lead a lot of us, myself included, when we're not grounded in Christ and in biblical identity. I'm just curious, like your student experience at Narrowgate, man, like what was God speaking into you that redeemed that? Or just generally, man, like what was God speaking to you that eventually formed like your vision and purpose? Like as a guy who had no purpose, and clearly like as a man who now has purpose, man, how did God connect those dots for you during your student experience?
Man, I think much of it was my perception prior to Narrowgate and growing up of that somehow Christian life was a very boring and subdued sort of life. So being around a bunch of strong, passionate men sort of helped break that idea, break that mold in my mind, and seeing people, passionately pursuing the things of God while having fun in the process, while having peace in the process. We did many things throughout my experience, but I think in service, man, we would go out into the community and meet with some guys who were passionate about the gospel and living, doing things that were maybe risky and there was danger involved, but they were doing it with passion and purpose. And so seeing that those two things weren't opposites, that those two things could operate together, that you could be a passionate servant of Jesus and experience adventure and challenge and triumph. I think that changed that perspective for me for sure.
Where in your student experience, maybe in your, probably in your vision and purpose solo that happens in the service phase, or just at any point, where did God start to reveal to you, or did he during your student experience that you were, to move into full-time ministry, even, church ministry? I mean, you're a pastor now. Like, do you remember when God was kind of planting those seeds along the way?
Yeah. Looking back at it, it was pretty clear throughout the journey. I laughed at this a lot while I was at Narrowgate, but my grandmother couldn't really grasp what Narrowgate was before I went. And so I'm telling her, this is what I'm doing. And she kept saying, man, I'm so glad you're going into ministry. I'm like, I am not going into ministry. I am going to this place and hanging with some guys for a while. And so I think of how funny my position on that was beforehand. But there were definitely moments along the way where I felt and sensed God, building my capacity for that, building my capacity for leadership, building my influence, giving me a voice to speak into other people's lives. And certainly the VP was sort of the culmination of that. But Daniel Bell played a huge role in my life and my Narrowgate experience. And he was really instrumental in helping me clarify that call and also equipping me for what was to come. And there was a specific van ride where me and him, for whatever reason, just the two of us in one of the, the big Narrowgate vans. And we were, I think, going to pick up some of the other guys. And he was like, he just asked me, this was before we kind of went through the whole process of how things work in the service phase at Narrowgate. And he said, so you're sticking around, aren't you? And my plan was, I was telling, all my classmates, man, I'm graduating, going back home. And I said, yeah, I am. I think, ministry is where God's leading me. He's like, yeah, I think so too. And so it was, an exciting moment where I'm like, yeah. So much for my plans. This is what this new life looks like of walking in wherever God leads.
That's so cool. I miss him.
Yeah. Thank God for Daniel.
Me too, man.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me about, tell us, excuse me, not just me. This
me too. I'm here.
Logan's here. Tell us about like what life has been like, post graduation, right? You got this call, you got this sort of vision and purpose for your life, and you have been walking that out faithfully. And from my vantage point, man, you have just been continually progressing and maturing and growing in character and capacity. And I mean, you're an associate pastor now, and that's, there's so many accomplishments and moments in your life that I just feel like that you just are doing great. So tell me about that.
Well, and hey, can I interject there too? Because again, I think to see somebody who is just like, man, you're killing it, after graduating Narrowgate, I think it's encouraging for other graduates to hear, or other prospective students to even hear, man, not only like what are the good things, but like, dude, also like what did you struggle with?
Oh, yeah.
What were struggles that the Lord helped you overcome, making that transition from being a student to a graduate, and now, vocational ministry. Like, this is a pretty safe space to to share the good and the bad.
Thanks, Weston. That was encouraging. And Logan, you kind of reiterated some of those points.
I'm here too, guys.
I never want to. Yeah, I would never want to act like I've arrived now, and that is very far from what has happened. But I've certainly been transformed from where I was by the power of Christ in me. And so after Narrowgate and moving back home, I was thinking about this before we did this. Thinking about maybe other graduates or prospective students, like you were saying. I think there's this sort of introduction period, I guess you would call it, of where people that you've known for a long time have to kind of get accustomed to the fact that you are different, and you know it. And so the way they address certain things was frustrating. So I'm like, man, that's not even a bother for me anymore. I've changed. That's not even a thing. I wish I could have said that.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That reality that I'm different. I know the people that I've been around for the last, 6-8 months, they know that I'm different. But all these people that I used to know, they only know the old me. And so there's there's some transition time where they have to become accustomed to the new you, and that can be frustrating because you're like, I'm not a kid, like I'm a man now, and I don't do those things anymore. So like, just, treat me like it, but you almost have to earn that,
With that transitional period, I mean, like, especially in relating to other people, in your hometown who are slowly gaining the knowledge that, man, you are transformed. Did that, in your mind, did that create more hurdles for you or more like opportunities?
Oh, that's a great perspective, because I would say opportunities for sure. It was almost like it would be a lob, and let's see what you do with this. Not like they were trying to trip me up, but just opportunities to see if you really are different, and if this thing really worked. And those same friends have now, really come around to trusting in Jesus. And it's been super encouraging to watch, I'm not taking credit for that, but the work that God's done in the people around me's life. But yeah, I think that's a great way to view that, is that it creates opportunities more than it does hurdles.
Tell us about the experiences, the challenges, the victories of moving from your experience at Narrowgate through the sort of the transitions of gaining the trust of the people that have always known you as old Zac, and then now you're moving into a real position. You have moved into a real position of influence and spiritual, respect in your community and church, and
I think some of that too connects to the fact that my dad is the founding pastor and senior pastor of the church that I'm on staff at. And so I've continually fought against this need to justify myself. Because I never want to seem like, hey, I'm on staff here because my dad's the pastor. I had never had any intention of going into ministry until God changed my heart I believe, began equipping me for that and then sent me to step into that capacity. So I think that same concept was what I had to remember and trust in those interactions, transitioning out of Narrowgate, was that I don't have to feel the need to constantly justify myself or prove myself. I'm just going to trust Christ in me and trust the work that he's done.
Have there been any, I know that you went back and were, I don't know if you started immediately working at your dad's church, but I know that there was a period where you were involved there, and then you moved into the student ministry and became the youth pastor, and then sent people to Narrowgate, sent guys to Narrowgate that graduated. And I'm specifically thinking of Gabe, who, came here at your, by your influence, graduated, interned here for a while, and then came back to Baton Rouge. And now he's your new youth pastor, and you've moved into more of an associate pastor role. So that's, we could pause there for a minute.
I was about to say, can we pause there for a second? Because that's awesome.
Why don't you take that information?
I didn't know any of that. And so, dude, that's, I would love to hear you talk about it, what that process was like for you. Because, man, that is so life-giving. To literally give away what you've been given. I think that's awesome. I'd love to hear more about that.
Go for it.
Man, I came back, and it was a couple months that I had sort of a transition period of the people who were leading the youth ministry passing it off to me. And then I took off with it. And then I started having what I was calling interns, graduates who were willing to stick around and hang out. We had sort of a curriculum, an idea, a purpose for them being involved. And Gabe, Fob, became one of those. And man, he was just an incredible influence on our students and was just passionate, excited. He was at everything, just a faithful, dependable guy. And I was teaching a lot of the teachings from Narrowgate to our youth ministry, and was talking about it, of course, all of the time. And so I would mention it to the young guys, 18 to 25, that were around at that time. And Gabe finally, one week he applied, and just casually one Wednesday night while we're meeting for youth was like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I applied for Narrowgate this week." And I was just so excited and happy for him. And so, man, I got to come up. No, I didn't. Kinda. There were some complications involved in that, but man, he started Narrowgate. I got to be here for his graduation. He asked me to present him at graduation, which was just really awesome honor. And then he came back, and I was still the youth pastor at the time. And so, man, I just threw him in back in his old capacity, but was putting more on him and sort of drawing more out of him. And man, he just stepped up and really stepped in and embraced that role, and man, had a passion and a excitement about sharing the gospel with our students. And so it started to become apparent that a shift would be appropriate, where I would pass the leadership off to him. And so we transitioned that, and he's just done an incredible job.
Are there any challenges you just didn't see coming that you're like, oh, whoa, this is weird, or this is not what I expected? Again, I just know that, man, vocational ministry, it can be wacky. It can be challenging. So I don't know, man. I'm just wondering if there's anything that sticks out to you as like, whoa, I didn't expect this, or this is a challenge. And then maybe just share, what God's teaching you through that, or how he's carrying you through that.
I think the emotional and mental toll I had underestimated. There's certainly it's a taxing thing, and I would come back to sort of what I talked about earlier. I preached a Sunday morning at our church a few weeks ago, and during the second service, there was we had a visitor there sitting by herself in the back, so she was easily spotted, and halfway through she left. And so I called my dad the next day. I'm like, man, this thing that you do and have done for so long that I'm now doing is just so weird that man, I had a bunch of great feedback, people encouraging and saying that what I talked about was valuable to them. But all I can think about is the one person who got up and left. And so, again, I see myself as oftentimes a confident person, but the lack of confidence, maybe the insecurity that comes with walking where I know I wouldn't be unless God has pointed me and, again, equipped me or is equipping me to be here.
Man, as we kind of near the end of our interview, I guess that's what they are, interviews.
Yeah,
right?
we're interviewing you.
Yeah. Is anything lingering in your thought bank of things that you want to bring up?
Man, I was kind of just curious. I know there's so many blessings about being there with your family, and being around family. And, how long have you guys been married? Just curious.
We've been married a little over 2 years.
Sure. And dude, I would still probably consider that the newlywed phase. And I know life looks different in that season, but as for somebody moving back home, like what did biblical community look like for you? Moving away from the neo-monastic style of the lodge and headed back home. What did community look like for you there? Or what does it still look like for you?
A part that I was somewhat prepared for, but maybe was a little more daunting than I realized, was I had to cultivate a lot of that. I had to create spaces for that. So I started, after a few months, I started a young adults Bible study because I was just hungry for that same passion of sitting around a table with people just talking about life and looking at scripture together. And so I started The Table, a young adults ministry where we came together and just sat at a table and talked through life and the challenges of life and the goodness of God and tried to find where those intersected in our lives. And so the other thing that I have made a point to continue to do, that I still do to this day, 5 years after having graduated Narrowgate, is I call and follow up with guys who were there when I was there, and Weston and Christian, the staff members who were there when I was there, just because their continued input in my life is so valuable to me. And it's just, it's something that I feel has been a continual blessing in my life, is just checking in with those guys and having them ask me, not the surface level questions that, maybe an acquaintance would, but people that really know me, asking me, how are you doing? And what can I do to encourage you and to help push you forward? So I think the answer that I would pass on to maybe a recent graduate would be, man, don't wait for community to find you. Cultivate community, whatever that has to look like. Man, find ways to surround yourself with people, because it's so easy to feel alone and to be lonely. And so actively, fighting that and finding opportunities to connect with people and to continue talking about the truth of God's word has been so significant and important for me.
Well said. Yeah, no, that's great, man. Well, Zach, man, I'm proud of you. I love you, and I'm grateful to just sit and talk with you and hear about life. But more than anything, man, I'm grateful to just to look back on how far you've come, and to remember that God is still in the business of transforming lives. Yeah. All right, dude.
Man,
well, tell Morgan
I
said hello, and thanks for jumping on a video chat with us.
Enjoyed it. Appreciate it, guys.
All right, man. We'll see you.